Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another special. Thank you for all the brilliant comments about the Sheffield United show last week. And we are going into Championship finances today, which is a complete, total minefield. I've been following this bloke on Twitter for ages. I'm sure most people watching this channel will either already follow him or probably will want to follow him. Please welcome Mr. Kieran Maguire on Twitter as Price of Football, author of priceoffootball.com, lecturer in football at Uni of Liverpool. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Doing very well. Life is busy. We've got lots of clubs announcing lots of financial information in the last week, which keeps me on my toes. And every day that I feel my jaw can't drop any further, a new club with a new set of absolutely clown-like numbers comes and takes that hold my beer moment and trumps each other.
Does it work like normal business where it's so if I put my tax return in, I'm doing it for like two financials. So does it all is it about now that it comes out, or is April your big D day?
No, it's around about now. Without wanting to turn this into a lecture, under UK company law, if you are a company, you've got to send in your accounts within 9 months. So most clubs have a year end which coincides with the end of the season. So it'll be the 31st of May or the 30th of June, which means that it all starts flooding in at the end of February towards the end of March. So we've now got 17 clubs from the Championship who've submitted details.
And this is details for last season.
That's right. So 27-18. So Wolves and Cardiff and Fulham were promoted. Sunderland went down and so on. So so when people look at some of the stuff I put out, they say, well, hold on, you've got Cardiff down in the Championship, but actually they're now in the Premier League. It says, well, hey, I don't know what their sales are for June 2019, neither do they, and neither do you. So all we can do is base it on historic information. So there's always a bit of lag, but that's standard for everything really in terms of data and information. You're never ahead of the curve.
And even an expert, you're still saying your jaw's hitting the floor and you're surprised by this stuff when it comes out.
Well, yeah, because we're supposed to be living in a world of the pompously named profitability and sustainability rules of the EFL, which are there to cut down on overspending and to try to encourage clubs to break even. But as we've seen in the last few days, Villa announced losses this morning. I think it was about 59 million. Even little Reading, you think, oh, yeah, Reading, they're a pretty inoffensive club. They're not doing anything daft. They'll come out with something sensible. They lost 750 grand a week in 2018. And you're going, well, they finished 20th. I can understand if Wolves lose a load of money because they got promoted, and you look at the quality of the players that they signed and the quality of the football that they played, and you say, well, if they go up, there'll be lots of promotion bonuses and so on. So you expect to see money going out the door, but not Reading or Birmingham or some of these other clubs who are just racking up ridiculous amounts of money. And every year when you think it's not going to be as bad as last year, no, they trump it every year.
Oh my God, my head is literally exploding, Kieran. Right, I've got a load of stuff set up to ask you. Can you just give a quick plug for the website and your Twitter, and just a little brief? How the hell do you become a lecturer in football finance?
Well, I was asked to contribute to a website called Price of Football by a guy I know. I'm a Brighton fan. He's a fellow Brighton fan. He said, I'm thinking of setting this up. I know you know a few things about numbers. Will you contribute? And I assumed that there'd be other contributors too. And then it was just left to me. So what happens is that when I get a little bit of spare time, I am quite prolific tweeting normally, and clearly I've got a day job as well. I've got a little bit of spare time. What I'll do, I'll write up a full analysis of a club, compare it to the other clubs in the division. And I normally, because I get bored very easily and I'm extremely childish, I will write something rude involving the first letter of each sentence. So if you look at our recent review of Middlesbrough's finances, it all looks like it's been prepared by a professional, but take the first letter of each sentence and it spells Tony Pulis ginger pubes. And
Didn't
so,
someone in the Daily Mail get fired for like writing Richard Desmond is something in one of like the date?
yeah.
Amazing. Brilliant stuff. Right. It's 2019 now. Is it actually possible for average Joe Bloggs football fan like me to follow the game purely on the pitch with no any kind of knowledge of what's going on, as in the finances of the two teams that are playing on the pitch? Does a football fan now need to understand when, I don't know, Manchester City are playing club X or Wolves last season are playing club X? Is it actually possible to watch without that part of the narrative now, or do you need to have some kind of cursory knowledge of the finances?
I don't think it's a necessity, but I think at back of your mind, um, if Wolves come into town, you look at the squad, you look at the manager, and you think, well, those players they look quite tasty. Where did they come from? And given the nature of it takes half a second to Google something, you find, well, he signed such and such a player for 20 million, another for 25, and you look at the manager and you look at his history, and you say, well, that must have cost the club a load of money. So the trouble is, we as football fans, I think we're naturally inquisitive about all aspects of the game. Yeah, when I go to Sainsbury's, I couldn't give a hoot how much money they make. I don't care how much the chief executive earns, but with football, it's tribal. Football's different. I'm presuming you're the same as me. I wake up in the morning. First thing I think about is football. Go to bed at night. The last thing I'm thinking about is who have we got on Saturday. I hope nobody's got injured in training. Have our opposing team played midweek? If so, has their star player broken his leg? And therefore, the financial part of that creeps in. You're not particularly interested in it, but if you say, well, if I'm a Villa fan, I'm hoping that Birmingham are going to be fined 12 points for breaches of FFP. And if I'm a Blues fan, I'm going, well, hold on, Villa is spending money like it's going out of fashion. And look at what Tony Z did last year in terms of nearly liquidating the club. So it can be used as part of the battleground that we have within football. And that doesn't matter what division you're in. I live in Manchester, so you've got the City fans accusing United of being run by a Cayman Islands secret society, and their owners in Florida. And of course, the United fans are firing back that City's success has been bought by petrodollars and countries with dubious ethics and human rights regard. So it's just used as part of the usual knockabout routine that we know as football. And there's nowhere worse than this, actually, than Glasgow. I've made the mistake on going on some radio shows in Scotland and have said things about the two big clubs. I hate both of them. I can't. I think I've got no love for either club. I'd love it if Aberdeen or Kilmarnock won, simply just to break this tedious monotony. But each set of fans is convinced that I support the opponents, which I guess is so I must be doing something right.
There you go. I've been accused of being a Norwich fan, despite the fact I'm the most dyed-in-the-wool Ipswich fan you'll get. But there you go. Also, when Ipswich signed Waghorn, I did a video then, and my God, I'm used to this many replies, and you don't realise what a big deal Rangers and Celtic, Rangers and Celtic is. So we're here to talk about the Championship. I always liken it to the Grand National. Like every other horse race is a sensible distance over sensible sized fences, and this one's twice the length of anything else with the fences double as high. In layman's terms, am I right in saying that the two major factors distorting this playing field is the proximity to Premier League TV money and parachute payments?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Premier League TV money it's the gold at the end of the rainbow, and we know with a normal rainbow there is no gold. So therefore, it's just a nice fairy story. When it comes to the Premier League, for three teams in the Championship, that gold is 180 million pounds, and you've got a 3 in 24 chance of getting hold of that gold. So if I was to say to you, but how much are you prepared to pay for a lottery ticket? You say, well, I don't mind spending a quid or a couple of quid. I'm not going to win. It's not worth more than that. If I said to you, I've got a chance of giving you 180 million pounds. I've got this ticket, and this ticket's called ownership of a championship football club. How much would you pay me for that ticket if you had a 1 in 8 chance of winning the jackpot? And then the owners think, oh, blimey, well, I don't mind. I don't mind losing 10 or 20 million quid in a year because I could get so much more back if we get promoted. So they go absolutely nuts, and they do things with the ownership of a football club, which they wouldn't do in their day-to-day lives, they wouldn't do in their home lives, they wouldn't do in their day-to-day businesses, because they just get skewed by the odds. And football is very, very very seductive industry. So that's the first thing. In terms of the parachute payments, you likened it to the Grand National. I would say it's a bit like a handicap race. And if you start a handicap where you are 40 million pounds ahead of the next person, that's effectively that's a quarter of a lap. So there is a distortion caused by parachute payments. In my opinion, they are a necessary evil, because if clubs came down from the Premier League, if you've got players who've you signed the previous season on a 3 or 4 or 5 year contract, you're paying him 40 or 50 grand a week, you get relegated, and you go from earning 120 million pounds a year in TV money to 7. If that was the case and there were no parachute payments, all the clubs that got relegated would go into administration, and I don't think that's in anybody's interests.
And people watching would kill me if I didn't ask, why can a contract or a business plan not be written to cope with the shortfall without parachute payments? Is that financially impossible?
No, it is possible, and I'm quite fortunate that I do speak to people in the game, and I occasionally chat to chief executives and finance directors who run clubs. So that's an issue which is discussed, and they say, well, for some of our players, that's fine. We will give them a contract, and they will say, in the instance of relegation, it's a 50% pay cut. But even so, the average salary in the Premier League is 50 grand a week. If you reduce it to half, it's still 25 grand a week. You multiply that by a squad of 25, 30 players, and all of a sudden you've got a huge amount of money going out. But there's a further issue. If you want your club to push on, you want to sign decent players. So the trouble is, you're in negotiations for this new centre forward. He's a Romanian international. He's played a few times for PSV or a decent side in Spain or wherever it's from, and he says, I want 45 grand a week, and I'm not prepared to take more than a 5 grand a week relegation clause. And you're thinking, well, he can get us 15 goals a season. And if he does give us that 15 goals a season, we're going to stay up in the Premier League, and that's worth another 120 million quid in next year. So you take the gamble. So, yeah, it can be done. But again, it's the seduction factor. You want to play in the Premier League if you own a football club. That's perfectly understandable for two reasons. A, there is the glamour factor, no doubt. And B, in the Premier League, you're not losing an average of 200, 300 grand a week, wow, which is coming out of your pocket. So therefore, you take that gamble. And if it doesn't come off, then at least you do have those parachute payments, which allow you to deal with these legacy players. That it might take you 12 months to get him off the books, but at least during that period, you do have enough money coming in, which will allow you to pay his wages, and the club doesn't go bust.
Can we just go a little bit deeper on parachute payments? When did they start? And what's their impact on the teams that don't get them?
Right. I can't remember. I can't remember the year they started. I think they were fairly early on in the in the existence of the Premier League. But I
Really? Were
mean,
they just much smaller?
but the differences in those days were tiny. In the first year of the Premier League, the I think the total revenue of all 22 clubs, and people forget it used to be a 22 club division, was 197 million. That's less than Leicester made last season.
Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy how much it's grown. So in the early years, there wasn't a big difference. So therefore, the difference between the Premier League and the Championship, it existed, but it wasn't the chasm that we have at present. So it was it was simply a way of helping out those clubs, and it wasn't a big sum of money, so nobody really cared. Um, in terms of what was your second question was, what was the difference?
Um, Let me just word it the same way. What's the impact on the teams that don't get them, though?
Right. In your first year of receiving a parachute payment, you will get around about 40 to 45 million pounds as a parachute payment from the Premier League. In year two, that drops to 34 million, and in year three, that drops to around about 14 or 15. That compares to the standard payout to a championship side who is not in receipt of 7 million pounds a year. So we're talking, yeah, 35 million pounds in year one, 30 million pounds in year two, and about 7 or 8 in year three.
So the total of that's 70 odd million
Seven
advantage over the 3
over the
years.
3 years, yeah.
Goodness me.
And that's in a business where the average income of a club in the Championship that's not in receipt of parachute payments is around about 20 to 22 million. So it's big bucks.
Goodness me. Good. So much to go on. There's obviously a lot of interesting case studies. So let's go through some of these clubs in the Championship. So I've just had a look, Kieran. The last 9 clubs in receipt of parachute payments were Swansea, Stoke, West Brom last year, Hull, Borough, and Sunderland the year before, Newcastle, Norwich, and Villa the year before that.
Yep,
And they do fit into some quite nice little pigeonholes. So if we can do them in groups,
absolutely.
the two exceptions are fascinating because one's Newcastle and one's Sunderland, and they've obviously split. They're the ones no longer with us. What did Newcastle do right and Sunderland do wrong?
Um, Well, they both had, paradoxically, they started off by both having owners who wanted to get rid of the clubs in the form of Ellis Short and Mike Ashley. But what Mike Ashley very quickly realised that if he sold Newcastle as a championship club, he might get, if he was lucky, 80 million pounds for it. If he sells it in the Premier League, he could sell it for his asking price presently is 325 million. So he said, right, I'm going to gamble. I'm going to break the bank in terms of spending money, and therefore he signed loads of players. He kept the majority of decent players in his squad. Okay, he let Wijnaldum go, he let Sissoko go, but he signed Matt Ritchie from Bournemouth, and he did that by offering Matt Ritchie more money to play for Newcastle United in the Championship than Bournemouth were offering him to play in the Premier League. Matt Ritchie, very decent player. He's well thought of at Bournemouth, and they offered him good money, but Newcastle just blew them out the water. So Newcastle just said, right, we're going to spend whatever it takes to get ourselves back into the Premier League. And they did that. And they lost a load of money in 2017, and their wage bill was off the scale. It's the highest wage bill of all in history in the Championship.
What was it, Kieran?
I think it was around about 100 million. I will
100?
find out that. Let me just very quickly.
I was going to complain about Norwich's being 55 in 2016. Was it actually that high?
Let me very quickly come up with my numbers here. I've got a big spreadsheet, and I'll come back to you with that in just a second.
Yeah,
I'm
no
just
problem.
calling up some numbers.
What about Sunderland in the meantime, Kieran?
Sunderland's owner, Ellis Short, he took the view, by this stage, he was bored of football because he'd been running Sunderland for a number of years, and it was costing him literally every Monday he was having to write out a cheque for £200,000 to £300,000 a week, and that's when they were in the Premier League. Sunderland were managing to lose money in the Premier League. He'd had enough. Therefore he turned round to Martin Bain. Have you seen Sunderland Till I Die?
Well, I'm an Ipswich fan, so I just watched it through my fingers like that because I saw exactly the same thing that was happened to us this season. But yes, go ahead.
Well, effectively, he said to the chief executive at the start of the season, I want you to try to run this club and it not cost me 200 grand a week. So you were left with that situation where you had, again, legacy players, the infamous Jack Rodwell scenario where he was being paid £70,000 a week. And you mentioned earlier, can we put in relegation clauses into contracts? When he was originally signed, Sunderland failed to do that. And for whatever reason, his career went off the rails, but they still had a legal obligation to pay him. And there were lots of issues. And Sunderland has been poorly run historically. If you look at the number of chief executives they've got through, if you look at the turnover of managers, there clearly is something toxic at the club in terms of the culture. And the relegation into the Championship just enhanced that. There was no sense of togetherness, and the club therefore just fell through that division. It'll be very interesting to see what their results are. I do occasionally ask Stuart Donald on Twitter any chance of them coming out, and he's got more important things to deal with, I suspect. And I fully understand his position.
4 million on a striker 2 months back as well.
That's amazing. And Sunderland have that money because remember, Sunderland is a crazy situation.
Year 2 of parachute payments.
Year 2 payment. They got £35 million of parachutes in a division where the average income is £5 million a year.
My God.
So if they don't get promoted, it will be the biggest underachievement of all time.
Wow. So the next 3, let's go with these long-standing Premier League clubs that came, and they seem to be in quite different positions here. You've got West Brom near the top, who shifted out some players in the summer, didn't spend big, supplemented with loans in January. You've got Stoke, who raised more than West Brom, but I think what you used to describe Newcastle's similar-ish. Stoke dropped a lot of money on players this summer. And then you've got Swansea, who really cashed out, had that horrible transfer window recently where Fur was going to go and James was going to go, and they seemed to ignore some bids at the end. And then Hugh Jenkins leaves the next day after the transfer window. What are your feelings on those 3 long-standing Premier League clubs that have just come down into the league?
It all comes down from the owners. The owners effectively make the key decisions. So if you take a look at Stoke are owned by Bet365. Now, the amount of money that Bet365 makes is scary. I think their total, the total takings they had last year, the total amount put on Bet365 by punters was £50 billion. That's 10 times the amount that the Premier League as a whole generates, and that's just one betting company. So therefore, the Coates family, who own Bet365, I think is it Nigel Coates, who is the chairman. He just said, we want to go straight back up, so therefore we will bankroll the manager. But there's 2 things that happens when you're buying players. A, you can afford to buy them, but B, they're spending money and they're spending it well, and not the same thing. And Stoke City did not sign players who mentally were prepared for Saturday, Tuesday, going to Barnsley on a Tuesday night, and on the following. On the following Saturday, they got to go to Reading. They just weren't prepared for that. The grind that you get in the Championship, and in my opinion, that the Championship, best division in the world. Now, I absolutely loved it when my team were there. But you need a certain type of mentality, and I think Stoke simply recruited poorly, rather than took the foot off the gas in terms of what they played. I think West Brom have got it right. They've kept the core of the team, that they've got goal scorers, and you need people who are good goal scorers in that division. So they've got Gale, they've got Rodriguez. They're going to score goals. They're going to concede them as well. So there's not particularly good defences in that division. As I'm sure you've seen yourself, even at Ipswich at the wrong end of the table, you're not focusing on teams you think, well, they're going to shut us out. They're simply going to score more goals than you is the fear. So I think West Brom just geared themselves to score loads of goals and sort of a bit of the old Kevin Keegan kamikaze. Let's try to win 4-3 every match, which makes for great football. And that's come from, they've got Chinese owners. That they've been pretty good in terms of backing Darren Moore. He's under no pressure to do fire sales. When it comes to Swansea, they've got 2 American owners. Hugh Jenkins made a huge amount of money when he sold his shares to those American owners. The American owners have now got bored of Swansea. They've realised that actually it's not a licence to print money. The profits they made in the Premier League weren't as high as they anticipated. Now they're in the Championship. Yet they can see the parachute payments slowly draining away, and they want to get out. So they've said to a succession of managers, you've got to cut costs. And what's the biggest cost for a football club? It's players. So get him off the wage bill, get him out on loan, get a transfer fee in for him, and we'll be happy with 16th this season. So that appears to be the mentality of those 3 clubs. It's a strategic decision made at board level or made at owner level, which then gets passed down to the likes of Hugh Jenkins or whoever the chief executive is. He then has to then work in concert with the manager to effectively to cut the cloth of the club accordingly, in terms of what are you going to do with those parachute payments. In Stoke's case, we're going to supplement them with money to make new signings. In Darren Moore's case, we'll let you spend what you've got, which is still a fair amount. And in Swansea's case is we're not interested. We're not prepared to subsidise the club whilst it's in the Championship. Therefore, get as much money in as quickly as you can. We'll probably try to flog the club to find some sucker who's prepared to take it off us.
Wow. And you used the same terminology there for Swansea's owners as you did for Sunderland's owners in the get bored. So I'd find that a bit alarming if I was a Swansea fan. The next 3, Kieran, I'm going to call them the yo-yo clubs, but don't get pissed off, Hull, Borough and Norwich fans, because this is a factual decision. So Hull promoted in 2013, relegated in 2015, promoted in 2016, relegated in 2017. Borough up in 2016, down in 2017. Norwich down in 2014, up in 2015, and down in 2016. We know the parachute payments don't go the whole 3 years. Oh, you'll explain the rule better than me in a minute. When I look at these, Kieran, I think you've got a beloved owner at Borough, a hated owner at Hull, and Norwich seem to have, I don't want to say lucked out because I'll get the bias things, they seem to have made a switch the year after their parachutes run out and everything has gone right, and looks like they're gonna go up and get away with it. Talk to me about those 3, and just if you can touch on what's the ruling for teams that only go up for a season in terms of parachute.
Yeah, what's happened was that if you recall a few years ago, Blackpool were promoted to the Premier League, and what their owners did, they said, we're not going to compete money wise. Yeah, we'll give the money. We give Ollie a bit of cash, but we're going to have a wage limit of 10 grand a week. Now, let's face it, for you, if somebody offered you or me 10 grand a week, we'd be doing cartwheels. But by Premier League standards, it was absolutely appalling. So they had a bit of team spirit. They were relatively unlucky to get relegated. They were still competing until the final day of the season, and when they came down, they didn't have a big wage bill to begin with. They were able to offset a few players, and Blackpool made money in the Championship for 3 seasons. And the rest of the Premier League looked at this and said, well, hold on. If anybody comes up, they could effectively take a bit of an air shot. Just say, we're not going to try to compete. We're not going to make glamour signings. We're not going to increase I hate to use these words, the brand of the Premier League of sexy, glamorous foreign players who cost a lot and who have to be paid a lot. They're just going to, use the likes of Brett Ormerod and so on, and solid local players. And if they stay up, then fine. But if not, if the side goes down, it's going to make a fortune from the parachute payments in subsequent years. So what the Premier League said is that if you come up via the Championship and you only survive one season in the Premier League, you're only entitled to 2 sets of parachute payments instead of 3.
Which 2, Kieran? The first
It'll
two?
be the first 2. It'll be the first 2. So you get the 42 and the 34 million, but you don't get anything in the third year. So as far as Middlesbrough are concerned, as you said, they went up in 2016 and they were relegated in 2017. So therefore they got their full parachute payments last season. They'll get the 34 million this season, but if they fail to get promoted, they drop into the EFL deal for next season, and they're on 7 million. So they are in major squeaky bum time. It's a big drop of income if it doesn't work out, and you've got players there on big money.
Talk to me about how Norwich have adjusted, because they came down in 2016 with what I thought was a big wage bill until you told me the Newcastle one. Obviously, there's the much publicised Matt Jarvis and Stephen Naismith, a few guys on honking great contracts. I think they've managed to cut back. You're going to know the figures better than me, and sold the Murphy twins and Maddison. So they'll be on their first year without. Talk to me about the Norwich model and how they seem to have done it perfectly.
Their recruitment of young players and their development through their academy has been excellent. So to a certain extent, they've had luck. So Norwich last season, their total income was 61 million. Their wage bill was 42. Yeah, that's still pretty high. The average in the Championship is around about 27. So their wages are 50% more than average. What they have done extremely well is made a fortune from player sales. So in 2018, they made £48 million in profits from selling players. The likes of Maddison, who I saw him play for Leicester last week, and he is a fantastic talent.
He's a great player, yeah.
So even as an Ipswich fan, you're going to look at him and say,
hold your hands
hold up
your
hands, exactly, and say, well, you don't see too many players of that ability and that nature in your time. So just let him do what he does. And they've also had some luck in terms of recruitment. The guy that's scoring all the goals from this season, you talk to any Celtic fans about when he was up there, and he couldn't win a throw-in, let alone score 20 goals a season in a division which is quite easy to score goals when you've got the financial advantages that Celtic do over the rest of the teams in the SPFL. So sometimes you just luck out, and I think Norwich have done that this season. Delia's not putting money in. There's no money coming in from the owners. It's all having to be generated internally. They do have a good commercial department. They do sell out every week, so their match day income is at a reasonable level. But even so, if they lasted, if they don't go up this season, and it certainly looks like they will, then they're going to have a major retrenchment, I think, in 2019, 2020, because everything changes when you lose your parachutes.
When their results come out next year, are you expecting to see another big drop-off in their wage bill for this current season?
Yes. Yeah. The only thing which might ensure that doesn't take place is that they could have significant promotion bonuses built into contracts. Certainly looking at the accounts of Newcastle, Huddersfield and Brighton from 2017 when they were promoted, they were paying out around about 10 to 12 million pounds a year in promotion bonuses, Wolves announced their results yesterday. There's talk of the promotion bonuses being 20 million. I think that's over egging it a little bit, but we are talking. Most players will be on £500,000 if they go up, and that's a nice start point for that's going to pay for your summer holiday.
Interesting. I think we need to deal with Villa on their own because they don't fit into any kind of category. So they're now in their third season in the Championship. Huge spend in the first season. I think copying the Newcastle model that you said. Playoff finalists last season, although they didn't lay a glove on Fulham in that final. All sorts of ownership stuff in the summer, Kieran. FFP threats, and you talked about Dr. Tony earlier. It looks like Villa gambled and they've got away with it, but they're not going up unless Jack Grealish plays every game like he played last week for the last 10 games and they win every game. What happens next year if they're still down? Parachutes stop?
Then it's a big fire sale. If they don't go up this season, it's very difficult to see how Villa can survive in that division without getting their big earners off the payroll. So in 2018, as you say, Dr. Tony, he's great entertainment on Twitter. We all love having a laugh with him. Oh, look, he's engaging with the fans.
He goes around and gives them high fives. I've seen him do that at the ground. Although I did see Mr. Chansiri on Monday night after the Sheffield derby came out puffing hard on this cigarette. Looked like he'd had a very stressful 2 hours. So I think they're all quite entertaining, these guys. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. And he was great. And he backed the manager. So in 2017, this was when Villa are in Villa are in the Championship. They spent 88 million quid on new players. Just absolutely insane. And they had a wage bill of 61 million. You're looking at that, well, the club can't carry on like that forever. And then the following season, what he realised was it's now or never. I've got to go up this season. So the wage bill went up by another 20%. He's paying wages of 73 million pounds.
Terry and Snodgrass, yeah.
That's right. And you've got what Villa did, that they took this. They did, to be fair, they took a short-term approach in just signing big players on loan deals. So they didn't actually spend very much as far as player signings were concerned. I think it was less than 2 million. But of course, if you've got the likes of John Terry and Snodgrass on mega salaries, and then they've also said to other players who were perhaps thinking about leaving, here's another 2-year deal on 40 grand a week, and the player signs on the dotted line. So the money was flooding out of the club. It has been flooding out for under Dr. Tony's regime from day one. Initially, my understanding, he was flying across from Hong Kong with a suitcase full of cash, and that cash was being paid into Villa's bank account, and everything was hunky dory. And all of a sudden, where's Tony? Where's Tony? He's not turned up this week with his suitcase full of cash. And all of a sudden, the people realised actually he hasn't got any. He's burned his way through all of his cash, and Villa were in a very, very precarious position.
How did they get out of it, Kieran?
They managed to sell the club to new owners. It was a panic sale, and the new owners, I can never remember their names. North, South, West, East. That's what I remember. NSWE or whatever it is. They came in, and fair play to them. They just allowed Villa's bills to be paid. I think HMRC and other creditors were circling around. There was a danger of the club being liquidated, not even going to administration, of everything being flogged off. They stuck in 65 million quid, and you've got to give them credit for that. And I think this season, they have backed both Dean Smith and Steve Bruce in the loan market, and by getting Jack Grealish to sign a new contract, and they've had a fairly decent go at it. If you got Tammy Abrahams there on a loan deal, there will be a loan fee to Chelsea, and he will be paid a considerable sum himself.
But Kieran, it sounds like from what you're saying, the Grealish deal is just purely to ring fence the prize asset, and they're going to have to sell if they don't go up. He won't be there in August, will he then?
I can't see him being there because looking at the FFP calculations that I've done and other people have done, when you're dropping out of the parachute payments, you've got so much less money coming through the door. How do you get your wage bill down from 73 million quid last season to, realistically, you need to get it down to 30? You need to get rid of all your biggest earners. Now, a couple of those biggest earners will be on loans, but Balassi was, Tammy Abrahams has been, but all the same, there's still an awful lot of established first team squad there who have been paid extremely well, and you'd expect to see them being encouraged to leave or out of their own free will deciding to move on in terms of their career opportunities.
Interesting. That's all the recent parachute beneficiaries dealt with. This next group, Kieran, I'm trying to be polite. I'm going to call the spenders. So these are teams who haven't had parachute payments but are trying to stay competitive with those who have. So I'm lumping in here Leeds. Please, if I've got any of this wrong, let me know. I'm lumping in Leeds, Bristol City, Derby, Forest, and I'm going to throw Sheffield Wednesday in for past crimes of a couple of seasons ago. Some teams there obviously are going to be drawing big commercial sums, especially Leeds. Some interesting owners, Mr. Marianakis and Chansiri and Mel Morris. How sustainable is this approach that these teams are taking, and how legal is it in terms of the FFP? I'll just run through them again, Kieran. Leeds, Bristol City, Derby, Forest and Wednesday.
Okay. In terms of Leeds run a really tight ship.
Okay.
I'd actually park those apart from the other clubs. They've got a manager who's on a very good contract, is my understanding, but historically, under who was it, Cellini, who was their previous owner? Yeah, he wasn't a big payer. He wasn't signing players. Remember, they sold Chris Wood for £15 million a couple of years ago. So actually, Leeds, from a financial point of view, have run a really tight operation, and their losses by championship standards are pretty low, and their wage bill by championship standards, again, that's relatively tight. It's relatively low. So I would say, to a certain extent, they're pretty much a model, about as much of a model club as you could hope to get for a big club in the championship. They don't overspend. They were only paying out £61 in wages for every £100 that was coming through the door. If you contrast that to Reading, who we were talking about earlier, they're paying £197 in wages for every £100 through the door. It's just
with 1/3 of Leeds attendance coming through every week as well. Yeah.
Exactly, sheer lunacy. So I think we park Leeds to one side.
I apologise to Leeds. I'm not the expert here.
If we take a look at Bristol City, they have an owner who is a very wealthy man. He also likes rugby. So we've got the rugby team and the football team in Bristol both being sponsored by Mr. Hargreaves, and he allows them to spend, but I don't think they're excessive. So they've spent significant sums by their own standards, but not necessarily huge by championship standards. So they're the type of club who could lose players to other championship teams because their level of wage probably isn't that significantly high. So I wouldn't say that they're too bad. When it comes to Sheffield Wednesday, Mr. Chansiri is a gambler. So he tried to get Wednesday up over 2 seasons, and effectively what he said is, I'm going to burn my way through my FFP spending in 2 years, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to put the brakes on in year 3. And that's what we've seen with Wednesday this season. So if you look at the squad, it's not particularly been enhanced. In an ideal world, they would have liked to get rid of Forestieri, but nobody is prepared to match the wages that that he's paid. If you look to see what's happened with Jordan Rhodes, Jordan Rhodes was on extremely good money at
40 grand a
Wednesday.
week. Yeah.
And he was one that was jettisoned. They managed to get rid of him in year 3, as it were. So the gamble didn't work. So let's get rid of him. If they don't go up this season, and that they're looking fairly remote, expect to see the likes of Barry Bannon and Forestieri if somebody's willing to pay his wages. And I'm not convinced that there are many people who are looking at him and saying, well, he's not as young as he used to be. You're going to get 2 or 3 red cards a season. He's a bit sulky. It's quite a gamble. Mm. So I think that they are going to find it tough next season. There appears to be, and here I think the EFL do not help themselves. There is talk about Wednesday having what we refer to as a soft transfer embargo, whereby there's an agreement between the EFL and the club that you will not sign players, or if you do sign players, you'll only pay them a maximum of 600 grand a year, which by championship standards is not great. It's not terrible, but it puts a limit in terms of how you can compete, certainly at the upper end of the market. But that's never been quite confirmed. It's always been hinted at, and I think if
I was under the impression Bolton had that last year, possibly, and Birmingham. We'll come on to those two in a bit.
Yeah,
but
Birmingham did have that, and that was then confirmed. And Birmingham's potential 12-point fine is for breaches of that because they signed Pedersen for 2.4 million when they were told not to sign any players for fees.
Wow.
So that decision it was supposed to take place last week. There's supposed to be a committee hearing last week. That was then kicked down the road for another 3 or 4 weeks, which from an outsider's point of view, do you want clubs having 12-point deductions being given to them in the 3rd or 4th week of March? It completely screwed. It's not fair on Birmingham City fans who are getting themselves a little bit excited about prospects of sneaking into the playoffs. It would then put them within reach of the bottom 6, and all of a sudden you've got a completely different mindset for the remainder of the season. So that's an awkward one.
What about Forest and Derby, Kieran, on these big spenders? Because we've just seen the imagery for a new Peter Taylor stand at Forest last week, and Carvalho came in for loads of money, and Graben. What about those two, Derby and Forest?
Well, Forest have lost quite a lot of money from trading. They've managed to get rid of players. So they've managed to make £25 million in the last 2 seasons. Sombalonga went to Borough. So they made 15 million quid there. So whilst they've struggled a bit, I estimated that over the last 3 seasons, their FFP loss was £19 million. You've got a limit of 39. So actually, they're pretty much within the parameters. As far as the building of this Peter Taylor stand is concerned, FFP is a nerd's paradise. And there's certain expenditure which you can have within a club.
And this is good expenditure, isn't it?
Which is good money spent. So if you or me are overdrawn, our bank manager doesn't give a hoot what we're spending the money on. He says don't spend it. The EFL will, however, say if you are spending money on infrastructure, we'll ignore it for FFP purposes. So if they want to go and spend £40 million on a new stadium, fine.
Okay.
That will not hit them at all. And of course, the benefits to them is that the capacity of the City Ground goes from 30,000 to 39,000. They're going to have some more money coming in. They're going to have more hospitality boxes and things of that nature. So that could work very much for them. And what we are seeing with clubs is that if they have ambitious owners, and you've only got to look to see what's happened at Wolves, they're hoping to go to 50,000. Spurs are going to 60,000. I work in Liverpool. I've seen what's happened at Anfield. We've got Everton wanting to move to a new 50,000 plus. Football is expanding in terms of its appeal. The year when I was growing up, attendances were falling throughout. Throughout my adolescence, because football was a little bit naughty in those days. I don't want to get too Green Street with you, but it was, things were quite lively at matches, and the demographics of those who attended were completely different. You didn't tend to get kids to the same extent. There were far fewer women attending matches, and since then, the introduction of all-seater stadia, we've got the gentrification of the people that watch the game, and it's become increasingly popular. There's the media love football, and football loves the media, and there's a very positive promotion from one side to the other. So I think as far as Forest are concerned, they're in a pretty safe situation. When it comes to Derby, I don't know whether you've seen the reports in the Mail yesterday by, was it Mike Lawton? One of the Daily Mail's good journalists, and let's face it, there's lots of reasons to hate the Daily Mail, which we can park to one side. Some of their football journalists are very well informed. They've got very good connections with clubs. And the report that came out yesterday was that Mel Morris was looking to sell Derby because it was costing him £3 million a month in losses, and he'd had enough. So Derby really need to go up. They are in a much tighter position financially than Forest. So they're presently, I think they're equal on points with Bristol City for that final playoff place. So it's a lot tighter for Derby. They get good attendances, but the trouble is, I think fans think, well, there's 29,000 of us turning up week in, week out. The club should be okay financially, but then you need to take a step back and think about, if you go to Tesco's is open 364 days a year, 24 hours a day. My local Tesco, it's a 24/7. Then you go to Derby County or any other football ground in the Championship. How often is it open? 23 days a year for 2 hours. That's how it makes its money.
When you put it like that, isn't it?
Yeah, and all of a sudden, actually, football is not a big business in terms of match day income. It's far less than fans think, and therefore the clubs are actually, they become reliant on other sources of income. So Derby, last season, their match day income was £8 million. Their wage bill was 40.
So for even for a Leeds or a Villa, who I would assume have the highest match day incomes, it's still not going to give you a huge advantage over everybody else.
No.
Interesting. I mean, some crumbs for comfort though, because a few of those you were able to debunk, and say, look, they're running all right and they can afford to do what they're doing. I've called the next three, Kieran, the worry cases. So again, correct me if I'm wrong. I've got QPR, and I don't know if this FFP fine is still deferred, this huge thing that was agreed last year. Birmingham, you've kind of mentioned, and then Bolton just looks dire, doesn't it? Am I right to be lumping QPR and Birmingham in the worry box?
I don't think QPR are a problem. This 42 million fine, that's a myth.
Really?
Yeah, it's what has happened is that it's actually a 17 million pound fine, which won't be paid until 13 years. It's being spread effectively over 13 years since QPR committed the misdemeanor. So it's a million and a half a year in effect. And if you think that when QPR were promoted, they got the benefit of 1 year in the Premier League and 3 years of parachute payments, so they got a financial boost of 180 million. Now, the other part of the settlement was a £3 million to pay the EFL's legal bill. Well, I've got no sympathy for QPR whatsoever. They knew exactly what they were doing. Anybody with half a brain could see what they were trying to do in massaging numbers and claiming X was Y and so on. So if they had simply said to the EFL, yeah, okay, we've done wrong, we'll pay the fine straight away, and not dragged it out, then they wouldn't have had to go and pay the EFL's legal costs. And you can only assume that QPR's own legal costs are going to be another 2 or 3 million on top. No sympathy for that. They tried brinkmanship, and they tried to get as far as they could. The other £20 million of the settlement, or 22 million, it's just a complete myth. What happens is that the QPR owners lent QPR they lent them 20 million quid. They never had any chance of getting that money back. So it's a bit like when I get when my son comes to me and says, "Dad, can you lend me 20 quid? I'm going out to a gig tonight." And I go, "Yeah, okay, lad." And I know I'm never going to get that money back. So it was exactly the same situation as that, as far as the QPR is concerned. The club is losing money. The club has lost money every single season for the last few years. So therefore, you give that money in, you call it a loan, but it's not a loan. And what the EFL said, well, we want you to change that into shares.
Right. Kieran's answered the door and got his wife's Amazon package or whatever it was. Where were we? Middle of QPR, about to go on to Bolton, I think.
Yeah, as far as QPR is concerned, they had a £20 million loan which they couldn't repay. And the EFL said, we want you to say that is shares, which you can't sell. Or if you do sell, they're going to be worthless. So what's happened is QPR's owners have swapped one worthless piece of paper for another worthless piece of paper. So they're not worse off. The club's not worse off. The club isn't going to have to pay out any cash. So to call this a settlement, it's just sleight of hand. It's accounting dark arts. We are entering the Harry Potter world of football finance here, and take it with a large pinch of salt. So in my view, QPR, they've got a £180 million benefit of getting promoted through abusing FFP rules. That they paid their players ridiculous wages compared to the rest of the division in that season, and they reaped the rewards of that. And it's cost them £17 million over 13 to 14 years. That's not too much. That doesn't sound too bad, does it?
Just really quickly, this 180 million you keep referring to, does that include the residuals, the parachute payments afterwards?
Yes.
Yeah. Right,
yeah.
Okay.
So effectively, it's 100 million if you go up in terms of extra TV money, and then you've got your 40, your 30, and your 10.
Got it.
In terms of your 3 years worth of parachutes.
What's going to happen at Bolton, Kieran?
But Bolton, I am terrified about. Speaking, I live relatively local. I've got mates who are Bolton fans. I think it's fair to say that the owner has been not particularly transparent in his outputs, in his communications with the fans. It looks as if some bills are being paid, other bills are not being paid. Some players are being paid, and yesterday things really took a turn for the worse, where the training ground was closed because there was no food there was no medical supplies. The police have not been paid, so the police might decide to withdraw their support for matches, in which case the matches aren't going to take place. So we are really staring at the abyss. And the real tragedy is that Bolton used to have an owner in the form of Eddie Davis, who he gave his life to the club. He gave his life's money to the club. Just before when he sold the club, he wrote off £175 million of debt. On his deathbed, he loaned the club £5 million to allow it to survive, to ensure it didn't go into administration. And the new owners don't want to say what their motives are, but they don't appear to be just. They don't appear to be in the best interests of the long-term future of Bolton Wanderers Football Club, and it's a tragedy what's happening. And for everybody's sake, it doesn't matter which team you support. Even as an Ipswich fan, you hate Norwich, but in order to have a rivalry, you need to have a rival, and you don't want to see that happen to anybody. Because I'm a Brighton fan. I hate Crystal Palace, but 20% of my mates are Palace fans. because we all grew up together and so on. And for 90 minutes of the year, twice a season, you hate each other's guts. And then if you're a grown up, you go down the pub and you discuss exactly what's just happened in the match. And ultimately, it's friendship and partnerships and all of those things that matter. Rivalry should be no more than that. So there should be nobody gloating over the future of Bolton Wanderers, because we're all bricks in the same wall, and you take one brick out of that wall and the whole thing becomes weaker.
Interesting. We'll save the good news stories right to the end. So this is my second last category. Don't worry. I've called this low turnover, low achievers. Okay. So this is 6 clubs, 17th and below, seemingly just not prepared to try and compete. They're just not going to do it. They don't want to bust themselves. So I've got here Blackburn. I know Blackburn dropped 7 million on Brereton, so I'll get your thoughts on that. Wigan, Millwall, Reading, who you have mentioned, Rotherham, who I'd be really fascinated to know how little Rotherham spend, and my team, Ipswich. So is there anything these clubs can actually do to compete, or is this actually the most sensible thing to do, to say, look, we're not going to run ourselves into the ground, and if that means we end up as a League One club, we end up as a League One club. What are your thoughts? I'll just say them again: Blackburn, Wigan, Millwall, Reading, Rotherham, Ipswich.
Right. In terms of Blackburn, the behaviour of the Venkies has been bizarre from the day that they acquired the club. You would think that they would have done proper due diligence and found out that clubs could be relegated. They weren't aware that you could get relegated from the Premier League. So they did all of their sums on the basis of a continued existence within the Premier League. They have shored up the club. They have been prepared to spend money on occasions to support a push for promotion. So I think Blackburn, they're certainly secure. They've got limited ambition. But what I would say is certainly in the case of, I would say, Blackburn and also your club Ipswich, is that you are losing a lot of money each week, even though the fans don't appreciate it. The manager at the start of the season is given a brief by the owner, brief by the chief executive, and that's keep us in this division, because it is a big difference between £7 million of TV money and £1 million of TV money. And certainly, when I saw the real aggression and hostility towards Mick McCarthy last season from a section of the Ipswich fan base, that confused me, because Mick McCarthy was doing exactly what he was told to do by Marcus Evans, which was get us to 18th. Anything above that is an achievement. And so, I can't comment on the style of football and the quality of the football, but he wasn't given money to buy players in the transfer market. If you look at Ipswich's spending in the last 5 years of Mick McCarthy, 2013, 1.9 million, 2014, 100,000, 2015, 100,000 quid, 2016, 400,000 pounds. Now you're competing with clubs that have just come down from the Premier
the 88
League.
million that you mentioned for Villa, is it
the 88 million for Villa in one season?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, we're losing to Villa, and we've got a bunch of workmen in the team. Well, if you've got a £100,000 a year transfer budget, then you're not going to sign Messi. You're not going to sign anybody. You're not going to sign Matt Ritchie even, are you?
Can you speak directly to Ipswich fans? Is there an argument from a financial point of view that Marcus Evans is a good owner?
Without Marcus Evans, Ipswich would be in League One or League Two. So what fans are looking for in an owner, they are not looking for an investor. They are looking for a sugar daddy. And there's a difference, because an investor is actually looking for a return where you cannot get a return. And you've got to be careful with sugar daddies, because there's one thing that normally sugar daddies expect in return, and that's going to be quite unpleasant. So just be careful what you wish for, because If you look at see what happened at Villa, Villa had a bad owner in the minds of their fan base in Randy Lerner. Randy Lerner left Villa. It cost him 150 million quid, and then what they got Dr. Tony. And Dr. Tony was funny. Dr. Tony was on Twitter. Dr. Tony was high-fiving people. Dr. Tony took Aston Villa Football Club to within 2 hours of going bust.
Wow.
So, yeah, by all means say that Marcus Evans hasn't put enough money in. Actually, Ipswich Town Football Club owe Marcus Evans 95 million quid. He's not put in 50 million pounds in a year, but he has subsidised the club. It's cost him 8 to 10 million pounds a year. And if people are accusing him of this, that, and the other, this is still the guy. Every Monday morning, he's writing out a cheque for 180 grand a week to keep that club afloat. Wow. So you just it's if people are going to abuse others, just take a look at actually what he is doing. I don't know Marcus Evans. I don't know the business. I've never had any meetings. I'm a completely independent. All I can say is in what I do in my job on a day-to-day basis. This is an owner that just writes out that check, gets on with it. I think he's probably got poor communication skills. He doesn't present or market himself particularly well, and as a result of that, people who go to the match, you just lost 3-0 at home to Reading, or you've just been turned over by Wolves or Villa, and you're angry, and therefore we're in a world where finding a scapegoat is what people choose to do. Marcus Evans is not the worst thing that's ever happened to Ipswich Town Football Club. He's not even in the top 10 worst things. He's actually one of the better things that has happened to that club, because without him, you would be unable to compete in that market whatsoever, and therefore you would be bouncing between League One and the Championship every season. That you'd be a bit like Millwall or Barnsley or a club of that nature. Wow. And I can understand people, Ipswich fans say, "Oh, we're bored. We've been in the Championship for far too long." Well, be careful what you wish for.
Interesting. Just talk to me quickly about Rotherham. How much do Rotherham actually spend? With this 10,000 stadium and just up this year to be going head to head with West Brom or Stoke at the top there.
They spend buttons. They gear themselves. Rotherham's wage bill, 6 million quid.
And what did John Terry make?
John Terry made 8 million from Villa last season. So
it's just absurd when you talk about it in those terms, isn't it?
Yeah, and Rotherham United, it's Paul Warne, isn't it, the manager there? Yeah. Solid guy. Tries to coach his players. He's trying to nurture these players. I don't know whether you've ever heard him talk. He's a fascinating bloke to listen to. He is trying to develop himself as a leader and a mentor, and rules to the way that he deals with players and how to maximise potential and productivity and things of this nature. But ultimately, we spoke earlier about having things as a race. If you're a club with parachute payments and you're at a 400 metres race, you're starting off 70 or 80 metres ahead of the rest of the pack. If you're Rotherham, you're starting 80 metres behind. Wow. Because the owners aren't putting in money. They simply say try and break even. They spent 300 grand on players. Their playing budget is not dissimilar to that of Ipswich, except they've got less money to pay out in wages as well.
Interesting. Finally, sorry, you've been absolutely brilliant, Kieran. I've got my 3 heroes, and we'll see if you agree with the 3 teams left. So if your team hasn't been mentioned, so I have got these labelled as low turnover, high achievers. Preston, they're in 12th, recruit cheaply, not overpaying on wages. 11th, and 7th since they've been up. I've got Brentford, 5th, 9th, 10th, and 9th. Brilliant recruitment and sales there. And I've got Sheffield United, second season back, currently in 3rd position. Have I got the right guys at the as my heroes in this league.
Yeah, Sheffield United especially. Chris Wilder, what a guy! I mean, if I want to support Sheffield United, every time I see that guy, I go, wow, what a yeah, you can tell how much the club means to him. He's a local lad, and he has done a superb job on a tight budget. You know, he's not spent a fortune on players. He's got in Billy Sharp, the centre forward that all fans want to see playing for their club. So yeah, I think they bought really well. They signed Oliver Norwood, who's been promoted in each of the last 3 seasons. He's a superb playmaker. You've got a solid back four. They've done extremely well. You know, fair play to them and good luck to them. Preston, I fully understand what you say. You know, they are probably the most unassuming club in that division. When you write out your 24 clubs,
they're the one you forget.
They're the one that you go, oh, I've got to 22. Who have I forgotten? Oh, it's Preston. Well, blimey, how did I forget them? They're that club. But even so, Preston find it tough in that division. Preston pay out £113 in wages for every £100 of money that they generate. So they also have an owner, and if you go onto the Preston forums, the reaction of Preston fans, I think the guy is called Trevor Hemmings, their owner, the reaction of their fans strikes me as similar to the attitude of many Ipswich fans towards Marcus Evans. He's not putting in enough money. He's not doing this. Lots of things that he's not doing. But every year he sticks in £6 or £7 million to keep the club afloat. So they have done really well. They know that division very well. They sold one player last season to West Ham. They got 10 million for him. That was a fantastic deal from their point of view.
Because he's straight back down into the Championship with Borough now.
So fair play to them, and this season they appear to be doing the same. They're bumbling around top 10. The wonderful thing about the Championship, I always used to think, was you got Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, win those 3 matches,
9 points,
9 points, boom. We're competing. So they've done extremely well, and the third side that you've got in the form of Brentford. Dean Hoyle, the owner, he's a very interesting guy. He used to work with Brighton's owner, Tony Bloom. I think for some reason they decided to go their separate ways. The Brentford model is intriguing. They are geared to selling players. And they're by scrapping the academy and effectively picking up the crumbs from the other academies in London. I mean, they're ideally geographically located, but they've done their sums. They are taking sort of a Moneyball approach in certain
dive
respects.
in. Sorry, Matthew Benham, Dean Hoyle is Huddersfield.
Sorry.
I just quickly Googled it. Sorry, I'll get loads of comments. Yeah. Continue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do apologise. Yeah, sorry. Huddersfield are another Championship hero who got promoted, of course, a couple of seasons ago. So yeah, Matthew Benham, what he has done in terms of, again, investing in the club, having a modest budget. I mean, their wage bill less than £15 million a year, and they play attractive football. How long that can carry on, to a certain extent, with these clubs, you are fighting against gravity. Because if you are paying wages of 10 to 15 million pounds a year and everybody else is paying 20 to 25, you've got a bottom 6 budget. So therefore you start the season and you look around and you say, well, who else is in the bottom 6 with us? But they've done, I agree with you entirely. I think those clubs are in many respects models for the rest of that division. But here's numbers which when you look at that, you go, well, how can that possibly work? In 2014, Brentford paid £224 in wages for every £100 through the door. The following season, 178. Following season, 166. In 2017, their best season, 116. They still got no money to cut the grass. They got no money to pay for the floodlights. They are still relying on an owner to pay the bills, and hopefully they'll make some money from player sales. And they lucked out with Scott Hogan when he went
Mepham,
to.
It'll be Ben Rama and Mopai next. You can still see the
Yeah,
production line though, can't you?
yeah, and I like the model. I admire the model, and fair play to Matthew Benham. So I'd apologise to him for getting these things wrong. Trying to monitor 92 clubs is tricky for us all. I think they're all good.
Absolutely brilliant stuff, Kieran. You've to have like insight for all 24 just at your fingers is incredible. Just really quickly, I don't know if you'll go with mine. Your top 3 or your top 5 financial heroes in the Championship.
Financial heroes, the 2 new guys at Villa, because there wouldn't be an Aston Villa without them. I would say, in terms of unsung heroes, Matthew Benham. I would say the guy at Bristol City, he's put in a fortune. I think Marcus Evans won't be in the top 5, but he'd probably be number 6. And it's Trevor Hemmings at Preston, and have I covered? Is that 5? Is that 6?
Possibly, yeah. What about the villains?
The villains, Ken Anderson at Bolton Wanderers. What he has done is that he bought a club. If he did not have the resources to run that club, he should not have bought it. And what's been happening ever since has been a disgrace. And I just hope for everybody at Bolton that somehow they get through this. And the sale takes place quickly, and the sale is not delayed simply because somebody is trying to make a profit. I won't name that person. I think he's bad. Dr. Tony, I think he was a charlatan, and when the going got tough, he just disappeared. So he was a huge disappointment. Other than that, you've got to admire the people who are running these clubs, because they're all doing it, and it's costing them fortunes. You got Steve Gibson at Borough. He's in for the best part of 200 million.
That's been
his local
30
club.
years worth of spending as well, hasn't it? Insanity.
So any, especially if it's a local lad, I always have got extra admiration for them, because they know that football club is not just a football club. It is a community asset. It is spiritually and emotionally owned and invested in by people. I'm fortunate I occasionally get to talk to club executives and owners, and you can tell from the conversations that the passion they have, and they know the difference that a victory makes on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, what it makes to people working in the local shops and factories on a Monday morning. And any owner that does that for those reasons, I've got nothing but huge respect for them.
Brilliant. Kieran, it's been absolutely scary and mind-blowing at the same time to listen to your opinions on all of this. Thank you so much for coming on and giving up your time. Can you just give us a quick plug for your Twitter one more time, because I'd wholeheartedly recommended giving you a follow.
Yeah, I'm at Kieran Maguire, but if you type in Price of Football on Twitter, that normally comes up, and priceoffootball.com is the blog, which I'm actually writing a book on football finance at present. I have to have it with the publisher by Friday night, and I've still got to write 5,000 words. So I'm not updating the blog this week, but I'll be back to business soon.
In which case, thanks even more.